So just before I came here, I was looking up lynching stats for Tennessee. And in a way, the fact I can't be with you there in person could be a blessing in disguise. 214 lynchings in Tennessee's history. By the time I finish with my speech, I fear that I have escaped the 215. So let's hope I do not upset too many people by the time I get through this. And now I did have some slides from PowerPoint, but there was just too many screens open. So we decided that I would just go without the images. There's just a few images and things. I can send them around afterwards if you would like. But we just thought it would be cooler with me like beaming down like kind of big brother here. So, all right. So in search of a political formula, what is a political formula? The phrase was coined by Gaetano Mosca in his classic study, The Ruling Class, first published in 1895. The political formula, or principle of sovereignty, is defined as the legal and moral basis or principle on which the power of the ruling class rests. The two chief examples Mosca provides are those political formulas that are based on supernatural beliefs, for example, the divine right of kings, and those based on the notion of popular sovereignty or the will of the people. However, these myths are not necessarily to be taken as cynical lies told by the rulers to hoodwink the masses, but are necessary for the smooth operation of the whole society. George Sorel called them myths. Karl Mannheim, and later the Marxist Louis Althusser, called them ideologies. Indeed, Mosca recognizes that a moral unity between the rulers and the ruled can create almost miraculous situations in which they may overcome materially stronger external powers in war. Today, for example, we might think of the Vietnamese against the Americans, or the Afghani Taliban against the Americans. Mosca's examples include the Spanish against the French in 1808 and various so-called barbarian groups, such as the Franks against the Romans at the fall of their empire. However, it is not enough for the ruled majority alone to have this moral unity. They could show great courage, but they will still likely fail if they are not met by an equal moral unity in the ruling class. Mosca gives the example of the Kingdom of Naples against the French in 1798, 1799, where the people were united, but they were betrayed by the pro-French sympathies of their ruling class. Treason, therefore, and more than treason, the unending suspicion of treason, paralyzed all resistance, disorganized the regular army, and diminished the effectiveness of a spontaneous popular resistance, which might have triumphed. The inverse is also true. A ruling class who show moral unity will likely fail if the ruled do not share their convictions. Again, we might think of various American foreign escapades since World War II. No ruling class can survive without an effective political formula. Ruling classes may fail to adapt their formula to the changed demands of society, or ruling classes may renew themselves or be renewed. In the first case, failure to renew the formula may signal the end of the ruling class. In the second case, the formula might be retained. The British Crown would be a good example. A new ruling class can arise out of the people with a new political formula. The ruled mass remain the humus out of which grow leading groups. Now, over the past 20 years or so, I believe that the ruling class has attempted to replace an old political formula, which was something like we the people, with a new one, which could be summed up as equality, diversity, and inclusion. The old political formula was a claim to be what was once called the free world against the totalitarian tyranny of the Soviet Union, and beyond them, of course, the hated fascists who were defeated in World War II. The new political formula focuses on the idea of the rainbow nation, all the races of the world represented in every executive boardroom, replete with 57 genders and lashings of sodomy. The old political formula, even though it was built on lies, was relatively successful in corralling genuine patriotic sentiment from the ruled who were grateful for their freedom. The new political formula is widely unpopular and has virtually no purchase outside the ruling class in both their governing and non-governing forms, which is to say that the ruled essentially reject equality, diversity, and inclusion as a political formula. We have seen the problems that this has been creating. No elite can rule for long if their political formula, which remember is the basis of their sovereignty, is not accepted by the ruled. When this happens, it is only a matter of time before a counter elite will rise and displace them. Now, we have all been part of a process in which the new counter elite will form. I have said that this will take decades rather than years, although events do appear to be accelerating, especially this year with what we've seen with the truckers and so on. Because the current ruling regime is straightforwardly left-wing, anything that is truly dissident is called right-wing. People who end up rejecting the system and seeing the establishment right for what it is, a fake opposition, end up where we are now, called something like dissident right. But because people end up here for myriad reasons, the so-called dissident right lacks any sort of conceptual or philosophical unity. There is constant infighting, charges of purity spiraling, and so on. But what is a purity spiral? Invariably, a purity spiral is simply when somebody wants to hold one principle over others. At root, the problem is a fundamental disagreement over a single question. What should be the political formula? Now, a political formula cannot brook an and. The Divine Right of Kings says Henry VIII, and only Henry VIII, is God's representative on earth to rule over England. It cannot be Henry VIII and Thomas More, or Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell. And of course, these and almost every other lieutenant that Henry had found that out the hard way. Now, Greg Johnson wrote 2 articles about this on countercurrents when the alt-right was falling apart in 2017 and 2018. These articles were called Against Right-Wing Sectarianism and Redefining the Mainstream. These are both collected now in a book called Toward a New Nationalism. And in it, he highlights the fact that in 2015 and 2016, the alt-right had been united behind a single political formula: stop the Great Replacement. However, as it grew, Johnson laments the rise of what he calls the add-on. It will be necessary to quote him at length. Now, as I do so, it is worth remembering that Johnson is an avowed white nationalist, unlike many of you, unlike me, etc. And therefore, everything that Johnson is writing is through that lens. It's just worth bearing that in mind. Now, his goal is metapolitical. Johnson wants to shift the mentality of white people in the West to be racially aware and to organize in a manner that defends their ethnic interests. He says, to make cooperation possible, we simply have to learn to work with people who share our views of white identity politics, but may not share our views on a whole range of other issues. And as our movement grows, more successful in penetrating and changing the whole culture, it will eventually be the case that white identity politics might be the only thing that unites us. Of course, we will continue to have passionate opinions and disagreements on other topics, but we need to be willing to set these aside to work with others for the greater good of our race. That one simple trick is the key to ensuring the broadest possible cooperation and coordination among white advocates, creating a movement that is larger and more powerful and more likely to be able to save our race. By contrast, people who insist on combining white nationalism with a list of right-wing add-ons who try to upsell you a side dish of Orthodox Christianity or Nordic paganism or radical traditionalism with your ethno-burger, who insist that these peripheral issues are essential to white preservation and who turn them into polarizing litmus tests and shibboleths, are guaranteed to create a smaller, weaker, dumber, poorer, and less effective, but more pure movement when we need to go in precisely the opposite direction. Such behavior is often dismissed as purity spiraling, but purity is not a problem. The problem is failing to distinguish between what is essential and what is peripheral to white identity politics. So the root issue here is that the sellers of the side dishes are ultimately arguing for the primacy of the add-on. The real political formula being espoused by the sellers of the side dishes is something like Christ is King or return to tradition. From the point of view of the Christian, stop the great replacement is merely the side dish. People will be quick to point out that these things are not mutually exclusive, but realistically, there can be no and. Eventually, Henry VIII will have the head of the and. Johnson's idea of a big tent is actually just an assertion that stop the great replacement is the political formula, and this is non-negotiable. So with this said, I want to take some time to assess the predominant political formulas in turn. So I'm going to take them one by one. These are the ones that are currently, I would say, being sold in the dissident right. And I'm going to give an assessment. Now, if you had my slides up, each one of these came with laser eyes. So I've got like Trump laser eyes next to this next one. But you can look at them when I send them around later. So the first political formula, America First. America First was mainstreamed by Donald Trump in his inaugural address as president in 2017. Since then, it has been more associated with Nick Fuentes and his Groyper movement, which has been in the news of late since Louis Theroux featured them in a documentary. Now, America First is a very clear political formula. It cannot brook an and. For example, America First, at least on the face of it, cannot accept and Israel first. Perhaps this is why it seems that Trump himself has quietly dropped it. Can it be an effective political formula? Well, I have two chief issues with it. This is where I'm glad I'm sitting 4,000 miles away, as I'm starting to get my little critique of America in here. First, it defends the very thing that is at the source of our troubles, the USA. To defend all things American might very easily end up being a defense of the materialist non-culture that has fallen like a miasma on the world. The USA from its inception was a proposition nation built on a concept with liberalism and democracy baked in from the get-go. Now, the aforementioned Greg Johnson, among other people, has argued, and this was in an essay of his called What is American Nationalism, which you can find in that same book I mentioned, and it's on Countercurrents as well. Now, Johnson argued that this idea of the proposition nation is merely propaganda based on a profound misunderstanding of American history that was perpetuated by Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address. And if you read that, basically what he's saying is that this idea that it's just this propositional universal nation is just not true. Like the founding fathers just had like white people in mind. This is Johnson's argument. However, I am not convinced that anyone could pretend that the past 159 years of American history did not happen. What it means to be American today can scarcely be reconciled with what it meant to be an American even 30 years ago, let alone in 1776. Now, it will no doubt be easier for me to say this because I am not American and I'm sitting 4,000 miles away, but the USA is an irredeemably failed project, and the sooner it is put out of its misery, the better for its people and all the world. To try to save America now is like trying to save somebody with late-stage terminal cancer. The idea of American patriotism should feel as absurd today as I mean, what does it mean to be an American patriot in 2022? I think that idea should feel absurd, save for the coming of the American Caesar, which doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon. Second, America First is open for redefinition. What does it mean to put America first? Now, for Steve Bannon or Nick Fuentes, it might mean, economic nationalist trade policies. For someone else, it might mean adopting free market economics. If diversity is our strength, then America First could mean putting diversity first. Now, you might think that such language games are silly, but our enemies do nothing but play such language games. And now the political formula is corrupted and subverted already. As Carl Schmitt would ask, who interprets? And I would not even put it past the GOP to try to argue that to put America first, we need to put Israel first. I can guarantee you'll hear lines like that in the next Trump campaign and other such tortured formulations. Worse things have been done to the US Constitution over the years. So that was my little bit on America First. Next political formula I want to analyze: stop the Great Replacement. Now, on Millennial this year, hosted by Millennial Woes, Philosophy Cat caused waves by claiming that stopping the Great Replacement is a lost cause. There is no reversing the demographic time bomb that is set for both America and Europe. She basically said the battle's lost. And on current projections, she is undoubtedly correct. By 2060, the white population of the USA will be 36.4%. For this trend to reverse, there would not only need to be a total stop to mass immigration, but also mass deportations. And not just the men, but the women and the children. It is not impossible, if there is the political will to do this. If masses of people arrived against the wills of the host population, so too can they leave against theirs. But this would require a revolutionary change to the American system. Now, somehow Greg Johnson imagines it requires simply changing the hearts and minds of enough people, and it will, over time and inevitably, become the Republican platform. Granted, he was writing a few years ago. Maybe he thinks differently now. And I in fairness to Greg, I shared this paper with him, and he said, like, he basically said as much. We've kind of we understand a bit more about how the system works now than he may have done back then in 2016, 2017. Now, I believe that the Republicans would sooner destroy the country and their own party than stand on an explicitly pro-white platform. Now, then again, in France, Eric Zemmour, right at this moment, is explicitly standing on this platform. As reported by Breitbart just 3 days ago, he said, direct quote from Zemmour, "My duty was to save France from the Great Replacement." And he said that France could be Lebanon in 5 to 10 years. However, France is not the USA. France can draw on over 1,500 years of history and military tradition for solidarity. Nationalism is baked into the French character in a way that I do not see in the Americans. And besides, the 246 years that the USA has existed is the blink of an eye in terms of civilizational history. Even in the face of explicit and daily anti-white hatred, the average white American is still very far from being willing to confront the realities of race. It's a conversation that white nationalists have been begging to have for decades. But even today, after BLM riots, after increasingly dehumanizing anti-white rhetoric in the mainstream television, advertising, films, even sports now, most white GOP voting folk buy into the myth of Martin Luther King and pledge themselves to color blindness. The least racially conscious people in America today probably all wear MAGA hats. However, this could and would change quickly if circumstances become dire enough. But still, even then, I do not believe that the GOP would be willing to change with their voters because ultimately they answer to their donors and, let us just say, other masters rather than to voters. Anyone who cannot see this by 2022 has not been paying attention. And yet, there are still two chief problems with the Great Replacement narrative of the original alt-right as a political formula. First, it was overly focused on party politics, which is to say, if you go back and watch all of the alt-right videos from 2016, 2017, it's all about whites voting for these GOP and minorities voting for the Democrats. Well, this is a mistake in my view, because as we all know, there is no basic difference between the two parties as per standard neo-reactionary analysis or even white nationalist analysis that pays attention to ethnic special interests at the elite level. Second, it is too concerned with the idea of demographic percentages. These are abstract numbers which I think do not motivate people. This is to say, so what if only 36.4% of Americans will be white by 2060? That's still 131 million white people. Realistically, this does not make it the existential crisis that it may first appear. And I do not believe it is a sufficient motivator to action. There are estimated to be only 5.8 million Jewish Americans, for example, yet no one in their tighter knit, better organized, and more openly ethnocentric community seems to be worried about them being replaced. In fact, there are only 15.2 million Jews in the world, and yet they seem extremely adept at playing the political game, advancing their interests, and surviving. Political power rests everywhere and always in the organized minority against the passive masses. If the political formula of Stop the Great Replacement were updated to something like support white well-being, tight organization at a local level might work to facilitate such an end. Now, on my Substack, I wrote an article about the de facto balkanization of the USA. Since multiculturalism is and can only ever be a disaster, this is the only future I see for America. And rather than pitching themselves to the doomed American project, it seems to me that white nationalists should rather be thinking in terms of which territories they'd hope to secure de facto on the ground, rather than necessarily as legal declarations of independence or anything like that. All right, next one. If there's anybody I haven't lost in the room already, Christ is the King. Okay, so let's have a look at this political formula. Christianity is an excellent political formula for any empire or state that must unite disparate peoples. In theory, it unites people from different races, ethnicities, and nationalities, even overcoming language barriers, while creating a new friend enemy distinction between believers and heathens. However, that is when it is in power. Christianity is almost everywhere out of power. And despite being on paper the most successful religion in the world in terms of total believers, it has become soft and malleable to the point where the clergy are making a mockery of the religion. Now, as you all know, I am not a Christian, but it pains me to see what is being done to churches. The Pope is openly subversive. In this country, the Church of England is almost more woke than any university. I see low Protestant churches across the United States talking about racial justice. There are hundreds of reports of pastors fully advocating critical race theory, supporting BLM, and even giving their congregations Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility to read. Now, Paul Gottfried has discussed at length how white guilt narratives are simply repurposed and perverted Calvinism that is in structure rather than in content. And incidentally, this analysis was repeated almost wholesale by Curtis Yarvin back when he was Mencius Mollberg in 2007. Schmidt's question, who interprets, is again important. Churches in general have shown themselves to be completely incapable of withstanding subversion. If you understand power, it is simple. Take the priest or the pastor, take the church. What can the congregation do against this? What mechanisms are there to oust the woke priest who infests your church like a parasite? Thus, it would appear that Christ is the king cannot help us much as a political formula at the present time. My view, as someone who is wedded to hard realist power analysis, is that unless the church is backed by the legal and material power to enforce its will, it will be toothless and remain the plaything of progressives. The idea of the separation of church and state was an early victory for liberalism. Why is Islam so powerful and Christianity so weak when Christianity has more believers around the world? Because Islam is backed by the sword, both at the state level and on the ground. Believers are prepared to act in the name of their religion against transgressors. No one dared speak out in Europe after the Charlie Hebdo cartoon affair resulted in terror attacks, and those who did were punished. Yet, churches burned across America, across Europe. Christians around the world watched Notre Dame Cathedral burn, and no sword was lifted. If this remains the case, Christianity is as good as useless as a political force. If Christians wish to smile and say, render unto Caesar, we are not for worldly things and so on, so be it. But do not be surprised if Caesar also then stomps on your head. In the words of the noted racist and bigot Morrissey, if you think peace is a common goal, that goes to show how little you know. Love, peace, and harmony. Love, peace, and harmony. Very nice, very nice, very nice. But maybe in the next world. So that's the next political formula. Return to tradition. Now, this is the rallying call of reactionaries. I recently wrote a Substack piece called The Children of the Ashes, and I think it's worth quoting the opening passage here as it sums up an essential problem with this slogan, return to tradition, as a political formula. We are all children of the ashes, victims of a civilization in a death spiral, who have grown up in a world mostly lacking in moral and spiritual guidance, dominated by the reign of quantity. People on our side of things read René Guénon, Julius Evola, turn against materialism, find God, join a church, lament degeneracy, disdain modern technology, long for the Butlerian jihad after absorbing the teachings of Uncle Ted, and adopt the stance of revolting against the modern world. I am, however, a realist. I do not believe that any more than a handful of people will try to live off the grid. I do not believe that people will be able to make it through the miasma of modern life without taking on some taint of modernity. I also do not believe that the children of the ashes, that's me, that's you, that's everybody in our spheres, can be de-ashed, so to speak. This is paradise lost. You cannot recapture innocence once it is gone. Now, a time will come when tradition returns, but it is not now. Our role is to help to usher in such conditions that tradition could return. As I said in that article, quoting George Harrison, now the darkness only stays the night time. In the morning, it will fade away. Daylight is good at arriving at the right time. It's not always going to be this grey. All things must pass. All things must pass away. Now, we are the children of the winter, so we cannot suddenly pretend to be the children of the spring. They may be our children, they may be our children's children, but they cannot and will not ever be us. And this is not a black pill. It's just an awareness of where we are and who we are, what we can be and what we cannot be. We must accept our role in the great cycle of things. This does not mean that we have no agency or no part to play. We have a role, but it will always be transitional. And Spengler, Evola, and so on all understood this. I do not believe that attempting to embody a traditional life in the current conditions is practical, and neither do I believe that anyone deep down wants it. I mean, I practically started a riot when all I wanted to do was take people's mobile phones away in Trumpton, and you remember what happened. To ride the tiger in the Kali Yuga is simply to steel oneself to survive it in the hope that our successors will be able to reap the benefits and they can return to tradition. So the final political formula I want to consider is clear them out. Finally, it is no great secret that I favor clear them out as the political formula for the dissident right. By clear them out, I mean nothing less than the total overthrow of the current system so that all its elements, governing and non-governing elites, are rendered powerless and can no longer operate. I do not mean the simple swapping of one government with another. I mean a root and branch purging of the current establishment and all its elements down to the woman who answers the phone at your local library. I envisage a time when collaboration with the current regime will be treated like collaboration with the mid-century Germans after the Nuremberg trials. Why do I favor this political formula when I have been so critical of the others? I'll provide 3 reasons. First, I believe this is the only political formula that everybody can broadly agree on, which is inclusive enough to let in practically all dissidents while remaining radical enough to exclude milquetoasts. Second, this is the only formula that might realistically appeal to 2 spheres that are only dissident right adjacent, which are the coalition that is built around anti-COVID restriction policies, having a massive real world impact right now, and what I call the kook sphere, conspiracists, alien men, and so on. Where there is energy and the will to overthrow globalist elites, we should harness it. Third, historically, the political formula before a revolution is almost always clear them out. It's usually framed as those fighting for liberty against oppressors or something like that. The positive program always comes after it. Indeed, any revolution is brought together by a coalition of disparate interests who momentarily unite in the common cause of overthrowing the current regime. And then, after the fact, the most tightly organized and ruthless faction seizes power for themselves. The closest and most obvious example was in Iran, where the socialists, intellectuals, peasants, clergy, known as the mullahs, bazaris, the small business owning class, they all came together to overthrow the Shah as the military decided to stand down. It was only after this fact that the Islamic fundamentalists seized power and sidelined rivals. Now, my view is that no set of elites could be worse for any of us than the current ones. If we end up with fundamentalist Christians, white nationalists, hardcore traditionalists, civic nationalists, whatever else. The leadership could not get any more warped or perverted than the current lot. I would simply settle for even vaguely sensible leaders. Let us say the Western equivalent of a Vladimir Putin or even a President Xi, who, while they're still terrible in many ways, at least act in the interests of their nations. All right, thank you. I'll stop there. Any questions?
In your speech there, you said that the low church got subverted, right?
Yes.
And then you also said later that if you take over the pastor or the priest, then that's what gets you the power, right?
Mm-hmm.
The low church are the people where the congregation rules the church. The pastor has no political power.
So
how did you reconcile that?
Well, are you suggesting that the congregations are like demanding these pastors give them like Robin DiAngelo's white fragility? Is this what's happening?
No, I'm saying that would be the high church, the people that have the episcopate polity.
I mean, I don't know. Let me just have a look at my source here. I understood this was happening in Baptist churches, which are low churches, right?
Depending on the church.
See where this exactly has been happening. I mean, the fact they've got pastors rather than priests suggested to me they were low churches.
You can have you can have a very, very high church with the pastor still. It's a.
Let's have a look where these people were. I don't know. I mean, it just looks like it's happening everywhere as far as I can see.
All right.
I mean, I didn't want to get denominational.
The ELCA, the Roman Catholics, all of them, the people that have the top-down hierarchy, they all got subverted first.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wanting to know if you had any way to reconcile the fact that it's the low church or the congregations that were actually fighting this the hardest out of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the only real holdouts have been what is called Southern Baptist churches, as far as I know. But I haven't really kind of looked into the ins and outs of like which churches have been better than others in trying to like fight the pause. But I mean, all you have to do is to type into Google like woke church, and you just see like thousands of articles come up. Like, I mean, I could have listed, hundreds of sources for that as evidence that this is happening everywhere. Although, I mean, who knows? It could be a bottom-up It could be like could be each congregation is demanding more wokery in the church, but I doubt it somehow.
I noticed that you used the phrase the term anti-white a lot, and you also used the phrase white well-being. Did you get that from the Go Free book I brought for everyone? Have you read that yet? Or did
no,
you?
No, I was just using them generically because at this point it's just so in your face that there's no getting around it. But I've heard that phrase white well-being. I mean, I think you use it actually.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the 5 key phrases that's in the book to use and to propagate. I just was curious if that's where you got it or if it was from me. So it's probably from me and the other white well-being people in the chat all the time. So,
yeah, probably.
But after that question, or part of this question is, do you think that using terms like anti-white and white well-being could improve the chances of a healthy amount of racial consciousness and ethnic consciousness where the previous attempts have failed? Because in my life, using those terms, I see amazing success at church, at work, and talking about mid-century Germans or doom dissecting about Great Replacement has always failed every time I've tried it. But this actually succeeds and gets people understanding and talking about things the way we do here. And I just wondered if you think that would be a successful strategy for us to implement with this new tactic of clearing them out. Because
I do think that using anti-white is a more successful strategy than what the GOP usually does, which is appeal to like universal, like, oh, nobody should be treated like this type thing, because it's and that's a universal appeal, whereas the anti-white one is like literally like you're just doing it to us. Basically, it's about us, or about you, whatever, however you want to phrase it. Um, and I mean, at the moment, what happened is every other group talks about anti-black racism or anti-Semitism or whatever,
Mhm.
and they are all like, these are specifically our issues. But then the the conservative opposition, they frame all of their defenses like using Martin Luther King. Um, and in fact, from what I hear, um, there's a strange kind of thing that has happened where the Republicans are almost like more anti-racist than the Democrats in the way that they talk. They're like, they have like literally become the party of like universal kind of equality or whatever. And the Democrats are just like straightforwardly like pro minority racists
Yeah.
at this point. That's what's happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have anything else. I just wanted your input on that. Thank you.
What positions of power do you think that our network of tens should occupy in the event that clearing them out occurs? Which I think we can all agree is it's sound. It's a sound political formula, but I'm of the mind that captains of industry in the form of for the first and not for the second. I work for a nonprofit that analyzes the data of where NGO money basically comes from. And I think captains of industry is probably the greatest place for us to start. We have almost no commercial ventures except for maybe you, unless I'm totally wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope to increase the amount of capitalist ventures that we do have in terms of capturing current institutions. Do you think that we should start there, or where should we have our keys to power in the event that clearing them out happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, to the extent I've thought about these things, um, are we have to realize like where the core of support will be for um for any power group that comes out of uh you know the right as it stands today. And I honestly think we're thinking about kulaks, the small and medium business owners. Um, I mean, one of the interesting things about the truckers that we've seen is that the truckers are literally kulaks. They are, each one of them owns their own truck, as far as I understand it. They're kind of like independent. They're kind of independent business people. Um, One of the things that I think people, because we're so dominated by corporations and because everybody's always looking at the huge firms and Amazon and Google and so on, I think a lot of people forget that 97.5 to 98% of the economy is made up of small, medium firms. And that's a huge, like, the combined wealth and if that group could get organized, um, they have independent means. They have a way of, I think, standing at, like, if they were organized enough, they could genuinely stand up to the corporations and so on and so forth. Because without those firms, the economy would collapse. 98% of the economy, it would collapse. I mean, so at the moment, everything is geared towards these kind of private public partnerships and corporations and financialized economy. If we can get back to a real economy, real people like making things, I think that would be healthy. And I mean, again, some of the libertarians in the audience wouldn't like this, but I would even think that you'd need to look into ways of curbing the possibility of these corporations rising again, because they really, I mean, I do think Moldbug gets it the wrong way round. I think it's very obvious that the corporations are above the so-called cathedral, and they are the ones who push the values, and the cathedral just disseminates what is kind of imposed, and people have shown this with the rise of the rise of kind of wokery after Occupy Wall Street. It's just obvious which with the who's in power.
So greater
Uh,
organization of these small businesses essentially is consolidating the amount of power for people we can get on side,
yeah,
as well as
we've seen
own.
like imagine My Pillow guy, a network of My Pillow guys, right? Only like he's not only like he's not a clown. Like he's serious. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
Why would that not be formidable? We've seen bits of it. Like I remember when Brexit was happening, one of the key power brokers in this country was the guy who owns the Weatherspoon pubs. Well, he's not like a he's not like okay, he's probably towards the top end of that, but he's not like a multi-billionaire corporate overlord like a Bezos or someone like that. And I think there's this tendency to always think of like elites as being those kind of super corporate types, but our power is never going to be there. That's their power center, so we can't control that in my view. So this would have to, like, it's an asymmetrical thing. So yeah, anyway, there you go.
All right, thank you, AA.
So, when you were talking about the America First narrative and the flaws with it, and when you make the point that the United States, or at least the American project, is the source of all evil, are you referring to the federal government since 1776, since 1865, since 1933, or are you referring to the people of America in general, such as Boston Yankees or Virginia gentlemen or something of that effect? Is the pause basically, in other words, is it a result of infiltration of the paused government we came up with, or the people itself?
No, I mean, no, it's not like the American. No, it's not the. I love the great American people. No. No. I'm talking about. The American project from the elite level, not from. I wouldn't say from 1776, but I would definitely say from Lincoln onwards. I think from that, like Union government from Lincoln, they had, how can I say, they've had an incentive to basically just lie about everything since that time. You know, I mean, probably Turnip and others can tell you more about Reconstruction. But there was that like kind of truth regime, and then that was superseded by what I've called as the Boomer truth regime, and this persists everywhere around the world through American power. And if that power wasn't there, I think everywhere else would kind of start reverting to type a little bit. I think that I mean, we're even seeing now, as American hegemony is weakening, a lot of the Europeans are starting to become a bit more, the French are starting to look pretty French again, for example. So I just don't like, how can I put it? I mean, I think America is like a unique experiment that has happened. And I think it's failed. I think the experiment's failed, basically. And I think that the great American people would just be happier if they had that national divorce that everybody talks about. I think people in the Bible Belt would just be so much happier if they didn't have to deal with these coastal elites telling them what to do all the time. And the coastal elites would be happier if they didn't have to fear being turned into Handmaid's Tale by people like Turnip.
Global American empire. We're heading, it seems to me, clearly to a multipolar world instead of a unipolar world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how much hope is there just in that? That is, how reliant is the global technocracy on the dominance of the US, or does it just become a multipolar global governance system? Slide right into it, unless we throw them out, unless we clear them out.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, because they're very reliant on the American military at the moment to impose their will. sometimes it looks like they're pivoting to let China take over. Like it's been very hard to pass that relationship between like the globalists and the Chinese. Um, and in fact, I was saying earlier on, probably the best thing everybody could be doing right now is trying to map who are the factions of the elite. I mean, like even in terms of the world leaders, it's become kind of clear to me that let's say Boris Johnson is not of the same ilk or as Justin Trudeau and old horseface in New Zealand, right? It's obvious that those two, Ardern and Trudeau, were a part of like the same faction, whereas I don't know, like Tory establishment in the UK, yes, they're connected to it, but they seem to have like slightly different interests and so on. And trying to work out the relationship between those factions, I think, is probably the most important thing everybody should be doing. Part of the problem we've got, Radlib, is that we just don't know who's in charge. Like the American system is so opaque. Everybody knows that Biden's not in charge, right? We all know that. Well, like, who gives him the orders? Is it the Chinese? Is it like Larry Fink? Is it like Jonathan Greenblatt? Or is it some like dark shady figures that we couldn't even name? And this is the problem. Like, power is so. You were showing the image of Palpatine. Like, who is Darth Sidious there? We just don't know. So anything that sheds light on that, I think, would help us try to figure some of these things out. I do think that the prospect of a multipolar world could be a good thing for Americans in the short term if America has to start thinking about its national interests a bit more rather than like being the global policeman or whatever. So it could just force them by necessity to take a more like at least Trumpian line in foreign policy, maybe.
Right. So the potential hope, I guess I was saying, is just living in the cracks, right? Right now, there are almost no cracks, right? Because the global American empire is nearly everywhere at this point. Certainly for us, there's little escape from it. But if there's a multipolar world, then you can play China off the U.S., off of Russia.
Yeah, I think that this would need to be replicated somehow, though, at an institutional level. Because I think the thing that is suffocating for most people is the fact that there's like, when we talk about the pause and woke and so on, there's just nowhere that isn't dominated by this bullshit. It's like there needs to be how can I say, like, if there was just a set of alternatives, literally you can count on one hand what we've got like the Mises Institute basically and like a few other things that don't that don't succumb to this.
We need the Russia Today school system and the Russia Today,
yeah, or just like some like scope for having alternatives, because at the moment these things are written into law. So even if you did set up a school, you'd be regulated and forced to, like, the government would literally just force you to cover their equality, diversity and inclusion stuff. This is how, like I said, culture is downstream from law. So it would require some legal changes somewhere along the line. There's no escaping that. And this is why the system is so all encompassing, because there's no way out of it until you change those laws. Yeah.
Okay. And of course, somebody had to say it. Thank you, my master.
So something that we've all probably heard you talk about previously was kind of the multi-pronged, decentralized rise up, so that the Eye of Sauron cannot focus on one location at any given time. To me, that seems kind of like a land-based thing, where you're thinking about this is a region, and if you're really thinking about the land, the region, the people of the land, you're really able to open up a lot of different questions, kind of like the demographics of the land. It could be kind of like a dog whistle for people who who want certain demographics. Again, you mentioned the local titans of industry of kind of like small businesses. That all operates on like a local land-based level where they have distribution networks. And then again, why are people plugged into kind of this global culture system? Why are they glued to their phones, et cetera, which they don't want to give up? It's because there's no local culture that would satisfy them. Alternatively, I think oh, and then again, the American formula, we've heard is failed. Something I think that could be redeemed from that is the land notion of the American identity, where this is the seed assigning sea, the manifest destiny. This land is my land. I think that land is should be at the front of the conversation, and it could really kind of satisfy a lot of people under one tent. What do you think about? I don't really hear about land that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a related issue to that as well, which we're actually seeing a little bit in Canada at the moment, which is that it's becoming quite clear that the protection of property rights is not being upheld by the, i.e., if you're against the regime, they'll just seize your assets. And I think that the idea of the land that you were talking about, and the idea of actual, to go a bit classical liberal again for a second, the idea that when you own some land, it's actually yours, and that nobody can take it away from you arbitrarily. I mean, those things are part of the American format. Like those are, I would argue that is a huge part of like American identity, the protection of private property. And I think the current globalists are chancing their arm at playing with just being able to take people's stuff. That's a very easy argument to make against tyranny, I think, to frame them as tyrants. And the more they do stuff like Trudeau has done this past week, the easier it will be to cast them as straightforward oppressors. Because it's like, well, hold on a second, you guys own everything in the world. Like you own trillions and trillions of dollars of assets. You want to take my little farm away from me now? You want to take my house away? You want to take my, what small savings I've got in the bank? I mean, these things will always look like tyranny. Yeah, I do think that you could do something with that land thing if you tie it, especially if you tied it to a private property thing. That would probably appeal to a lot of Americans naturally, I would say. You don't have to cast it as capitalism versus socialism. That stuff doesn't seem to land with people because it belongs to the old like Cold War argument. You just be like, well, why should these people be allowed to take our stuff? It's just theft. It's just like, yeah, there you go.
Well, I'm not really, I don't really care one way or another if like the land is owned by me or if it's owned by my king. But you see Bill Gates, he owns the most farmland in the US. That just doesn't make any sense. People, I'm sure trucks, they're dissatisfied that they're a permanent renter class at this point. I think the notion of like, there's it's like a class, it's the renter class, but they could rent from the king and it wouldn't necessarily be the same class that they're put into. I don't know, maybe that's just a tangent.
Yeah, I mean, people might want to think about, should there be a limit to the amount of land that Bill Gates can own? Yes, stop him owning it. I mean, again, we should get past these like, capitalist, socialist stuff. I mean, why should the fate of the nation's food stock be in the hands of one man? Shouldn't be. That should be stopped. So, and I think that would be a very easy argument to make as well. So yeah.
Well, I generally agree with your strategy of clear them out. I'm just worried about the whirlwind. You said after the Iranian Revolution, the imams took over. Well, your strategy is broad enough to even encompass portions of the disenfranchised left. So how do we prevent them from also
No,
being
you see,
influenced?
you see, what can you just flesh out like who are the disenfranchised left?
Well, I suppose the non-astroturf portions of Antifa and similar ilk. The genuine communists slash gender communists slash.
No, I mean, I think when push comes to shove, it's very easy to expose those people as, even if they adopt stances as revolutionaries or radicals, they in my experience, they start defending the regime pretty quickly when you put the pressure on them, and you know it's utterly exposed every time. I mean, for example, um, when when January the 6th happened, how many of those leftists were saying like, yeah, this is great, you know, let's end the American regime? No, they very quickly started like, you know, spouting, like echoing what the mainstream media was saying. Same thing in this country when the Tories actually were like, yeah, we're going to end the license for the BBC. All of these people who like say, yeah, the BBC is right wing were suddenly defending it and saying like, this is awful. How can you do this? You know, so um, the left are just pretend. A lot of those people on the left aren't for real. They're just pretentious.
Do you believe there is a faction that is purely opportunist within them that would seize upon the clear them out strategy if that actually started to gain enough steam?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, in this country, I do see in this country, one group who are organized are like the Jeremy Corbyn faction, you know, the Momentum movement and so on. I mean, they've been momentarily crushed because, of course, they're disgusting anti-Semites, as we discovered. But yeah, you'd have to be more organized than them, basically, in such a situation. But I think if when push comes to shove, they'd go down fighting with the regime because they know, in their heart of hearts, they know that all their bullshit is upheld by. They already have the government they want, and they're starting to become more open about that now. If you listen to the likes of Vaush, and like they've started to like unironically just become like shills with the American government.
My question is if you could speak a little to the religiosity of wokeness. I live in a blue city. I've worked in a company in the belly of the beast. And by and large, the people that are instituting this kind of artifice of wokeness are HR managers or these subscription types that would generally regard themselves as almost entirely apolitical. But I have this sentiment that these same individuals sent 200 years back in time would be loyal members in their community. They would be church going. They would be incredibly proud to have their identity with their community. So how do you kind of combat this decentralized religiosity of wokeness that's almost like the absolute form of petty tyranny in modern society?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's no alternative. There's no way to remove it until the law it is defanged by the law. I mean, it's just a straightforward. There's no like cultural solution to it while they're backed by the state. This petty tyranny is afforded by and pushed by the establishment. It's the official doctrine. It is the political formula of now. As long as that remains the case, there's nothing. As soon as you take that apparatus away, most of those same people will ape the new bullshit that the new regime will put in. But I agree that the basic structure of it is religious. And as I mentioned, the best breakdown of this is by Paul Gottfried in his book After. Which book is it? In fact, it's in After Liberalism. No, it's in Multiculturalism and the Politics of Guilt Towards a Secular Theocracy. And in that book, he basically bearing in mind he wrote it in 2002, it's very prescient analysis. He basically shows how they exploited a kind of system that there's a kind of Calvinist underpinning to the way that wokery works, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I remember back in 2016, 2017, I went to a conference at was it Renaissance Society of America? No, I was at the Shakespeare, the Shakespeare Association of America. I was at, and I saw this this New England scholar, very well respected woman. She was at Yale or Harvard. I think she was at Yale, and they did this panel on like people of color or scholars of color, and she basically gave a paper in which she tried to like, it was just like a straight, it was almost, it was religious in tone, because she was talking about how guilty she was about her whiteness. She was basically apologizing for her existence, and it was like a kind of public what do you call it, what's the name for that, it was like a kind of, it was like kind of bearing your, like declaring your sins to the congregation. I could only I walked out after 10 minutes. I couldn't fucking stand it, because it was just so, it was so weird to witness that. But it was unmistakably that same scholar 100 or 200 years ago would have been doing the same thing. It kind of reminded, I don't know if you've ever seen that film There Will Be Blood, but elements of it remind me of the church situation in that, you know, where you know, he kind of makes, remember there's the preacher and there's the Daniel Plainview, and he kind of makes him publicly remonstrate, you know, I abandoned my child. It's kind of like the scene was like that. It's unmistakably religious in tone, without doubt.
Thank you. I'll yield the mic.
So kind of stating back something that you can comment on. Ride the Tiger is basically the praxis, right? It's the practice we all need to be operating under, but orienting towards a goal, towards clear them out being the kind of like peak end. But knowing that those two things kind of sit at odds, where one is inactive while you're waiting for a moment for it being active. Where does that intersection naturally kind of start to begin? I mean, as the last speaker, I'm in a similar spot, the same city. And the moment where we get to clear them out is far from us, when we are the ones being cleared out actively. Where do you start to clear them out? Like, do I go to my local library and just start harassing state-sponsored lesbians, or?
Yeah, so the Ride the Tiger idea, it's not actually passive. It's not saying do nothing. If you really understand Ride the Tiger, I mean, just put it in very crude terms, it's like Ride the Tiger is finding the inner strength so that living at this time, you know, isn't going to turn you into a girl, for example. Like, you're not going to succumb to all of the, you're going to find a way to just be immune to all of the stuff, because there's so many things there's so many things that can pull you into nihilism. So if you actually read Ride the Tiger, he's talking about like, how do you not succumb to that? Because ultimately the people who are going to be able to clear them out, first of all, have to learn to be these men among the ruin. Like, you have to be immune from all the bullshit. And in you know, some of your cases where you're surrounded by this every day, as I used to be in my old job, you know, it can be really difficult, because you're just like, you know, you have to have the inner steel not to scream, basically. So Ride the Tiger is about a kind of a stoic attitude. So they're not really contradictory. It's like if you successfully ride the tiger, you may then become the sort of person who's able to, you know, lead the lead the charge to clear them out. Um, in terms of actually enacting that, again, the circumstances will present themselves. There'll be opportunities, but at the moment, again, it's early stages. We have to, you know, the ability to organize is something that people need to be thinking about, like organized action, but done in such a way that it's not like gonna draw the eye of Sauron, for example. Like, I mean, you can organize other things. It doesn't always have to be kind of marching. I don't know why people love to march so much. Because as we've seen, that leads to disasters because
Because we're getting
the
stomped
feds
on.
seem to love. Yeah, it gets stomped
Yeah,
on.
when you're
exactly.
getting when you get marched on every day, it ends up becoming the only thing that kind of starts talking to you.
What marching?
Yeah, marching back.
Okay, I mean, or I mean, you guys can organize a march if you want, but I just, I just think that that's the sort. For some reason, that is the sort of thing that I understand why people do it. It's for morale and so on, but I think there's other things that you can there's other and more effective things that you could focus organization on. You know, in fact, I do think some of the stuff that some of the parent organization against the CRT stuff has been quite good. And if you can like see the trouble is that a lot of the people who organize and are they tend to be boomers, as I'm sure Yiz knows. Um, what our guys need to be doing is somehow embedding themselves in things that are already being organized. Okay. And then kind of like trying to steer them away from um, what I would describe as boomer traps, right? Um, and so, like for example, oh, a great victory about against CRT or whatever. Well, like the Tories have done this in this country. They have merely asserted that schools have to be neutral on BLM. Schools have to be neutral on um, things like Stonewall. This has been a thing. Now the left have been like having a meltdown over this. It's not. It's still like couched in the language of like neutrality and kind of like universalism and so on and so forth. Um, there needs to be a way of fighting back with a bit more teeth, because neutrality, left can always work around that bullshit, as we know, or you know, universalism, they can always find a way to maneuver around those things. It has to be like explicitly anti. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, so the clear them out obviously has like a historical validity. I mean, it's driven every revolution for the last 300 years ish.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of raises the question of like, I mean, we've had this centuries now of clear them out, followed by a positive vision that comes later. But every single one of those has just led us deeper into the road to hell, right? So what makes our revolution any different? I mean, we are somehow free of all of the rotten roots of these other revolutions. I mean, you say that, well, anything would be better at this point, but I'm sure Robespierre thought that about Louis the 16th. I'm sure that Lenin thought that about Tsar Nicholas, and they were all wrong. Like each one of these turns just leads us deeper, spiraling into like the abyss.
Well, what I would say, catching my words a little bit, is that not all revolutions are created equal. There have been conservative revolutions too, and you know, um, I mean, we talked recently about Franco, for example. Okay, it didn't last forever, you know, but um, there are possibilities, I would say, of uh, of a revolution going a different way. Um, I mentioned the revolution in Iran. Yeah, okay, that hasn't been that great for the people of Iran, but at the very least, they don't. Their people aren't dealing with all of the shit that we have to put up with. At least they're like protecting their culture, their heritage, their tradition. You know, they've got other problems. Corrupt leadership and so on and so forth. But that comes with every regime. They still have like bulwarks because it was a conservative revolution. Um, same. I mean, the same could be said of many other ones that we could look at.
So with Franco and with our, so is it religion that has to be the difference? Because I'm trying to find like the factor, like what's the factor that differentiates us from like liberal
Well,
revolutions?
well, I mean, I think it's our general orientation. I would say an orientation that is not leftist in nature. I think that, and the thing is that every time and place will have its own. It can't like to try to find. It has to be just specific to its own time and place. I don't think that there's any like if we start trying to abstract it and trying to write down a kind of universal formula for it, then we would be thinking like French revolutionaries, and that can't be that can't sorry that can't be us. And I envisage that it will happen slightly differently in each place. The French version of it will be different from the American version of it, will be different from the British version of it, will be different from the Japanese version of it, etc., etc. Because what I'm imagining is the world reverting back to its historical norm. We live the extremists. The extremists are the globalists. They are the ones who have a different vision of the world from all other peoples or other cultures that have ever existed. All we want to do is to try to revert the world back to its historical norm, like a reversion to the mean, if you want. We're living in an anomaly. So in a way, we're not going to solve all the world's problems. Like you'll still have corruption, you'll still have things that you don't like, and so on and so forth. It's never going to be any utopia. But getting rid of this kind of globalist, kind of international gangster kind of hold over the world should be, whatever government you end up with is going to be better than them. So, yeah.
I hope that's the case. Thank you.
Hey, how's it going today? I have a question sort of about aesthetics, and there's a lot of contrast between our aesthetic and the aesthetic of our enemies. They're just the epitome of ugly, and there's a lot of beautiful people in this room, and we want to have beautiful lives and beautiful aesthetics that other people can admire and get as an ideal that we show to other people. And I see that a lot in the lives of people here, but one place where that isn't necessarily shown is in art. There's not really as much of a contingent of an art right. Whenever right people try to make art, it's very inherently political. Whereas where I would say a good example of art right would be in Eye of Sauron, Tolkien. Tolkien was a very staunch traditionalist, and he didn't explicitly say tradition is good, but it bled through in his work. So how important would you say it is for us to give a good sort of art right aesthetic as a contrast to the ugliness of our enemies?
Yeah, I do. I think aesthetics and beauty and truth and so on are things that we have on our side. Um, I do, being always realists and politically focused, as you know. I do worry sometimes that people try to use like aesthetics as a kind of like cope or escape from the political. Um, if you're able to produce great work while still being like committed, I guess that would be the ideal. And there are examples in history of people like this. The modernists, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Tolkien, as you mentioned. These were guys who had like really strong political views, but they were still able to produce great work. So I do think Wyndham Lewis is another guy who had this. Trying to think of some others. So I mean, there is like the aesthetics are important, and I think they should help like bring people to our side and so on. But if you make aesthetics your only thing, I just feel like some people try to use it as a way out of thinking about politics, as if like there's your like little solace. It's not going to be a solace.
Yeah, a lot of
It's
people use it
part
as
of it.
the and in addition to the first order of power, which is just get them out. That's get them out and aesthetics.
Yeah, well, yeah. It'll just be a part. It'll just be a natural part of it, I think. And I mean, I do think that the more I do agree that overtly propagandistic art is always bad. Like it's much better if these themes just come through rather than being like a kind of otherwise just write an essay. If it's just going to be a political thing, just write a speech or an essay. Don't make it art. So yeah, I agree I agree that right wing agitprop is as bad as left wing agitprop.
Yeah, because you see like Ziz culture, Hyperborean, Giga Chad, like that's the kind of stuff that gets in the youth. And it's not necessarily as good as getting them in from the philosophical basis right away, but it can be a legitimate gateway into getting them into the movement.
Yeah, and I do see it, like I see like people are writing science fiction now, and people are doing more of this sort of stuff. I know like Vox Day does a lot of stuff. So yeah, there's nothing stopping. I mean, one of the things that I think that people should think about more is the idea of the kind of the epic or the hello
Lights just turned off. We're good though.
Yeah, okay. You're all sitting in the dark, or
Yep.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people have always done is kind of preserved history by mythologizing it, and because our history is being lost and erased, one of the very valuable things that artists could do is to try to preserve stories through art, if that makes any sense. Because I mean, therefore, like it doesn't necessarily have to be political. It's just like preserving the history, telling the story. Yeah. Or I mean, in Tolkien's case, it's a kind of set of heroic ideals as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would contend that the biggest problem for the path of divine right for the right is the inherent nature of low church in the United States. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the charismatics aren't going to bring about the Giga Chad monarch here. Let's be honest with that. I wager the step forward if we were to propose divine things in the United States for the adoption of either orthodoxy or pre-Vatican II Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that's viable as opposed to low church Protestantism?
I mean, you see, this is a thing. It's like, well, okay, now the political formula is becoming like it has to be like pre-Vatican II Catholicism, or now it's like I just think that all of those sorts of sectarian issues have to be like put on hold until you until there's a space to kind of have that battle, because at the moment all other issues are superseded by the fact that we're being ruled by you know, a set of you know, terrible leaders who are trying to destroy humanity. Basically, I mean, they're trying to destroy all cultures, all histories, all. I mean, this thing is like a acid that dissolves everything, morality, everything that we love. Um, so, yeah, like I said in the talk, I think that if you start focusing on those other sorts of issues first, you're just going to be overcome by infighting. And I mean, if I'm going to be honest, we just don't have the space for like Orthodox Christians to argue with Catholics, to argue with Presbyterians. You know, they all have to be united at the current time. You know, Christians versus pagans, etc., etc., etc. We just have the fight after we've taken over. You know, there'll be, like I said, there'll be one faction who rises victorious, and if it is the you know, the reactionary Catholics, then you know, I'll learn how to say my Hail Marys again.
You know, you almost have to look at this whole situation like, yeah, sure, he's a Carlist, that guy's a phalangist, but who cares? The Republicans are killing the nuns, so you got to do something about it regardless. You have to ally with these guys.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, so what might the process of consolidating the dissident right or true right or whatever you want to call it behind a single look like? Because sort of occurring between, say, the us, if we're the clear map people, and the great replacement, stop great replacement people, as I think sort of was beginning to happen, listening to Millennial, listening to those, and listening to, say, Morgoth, and a lot of it sounded very similar, though. Process isn't obviously a cat controversy. But how do we say approach the based populists behind America First, and say maybe getting ahead of yourself there, or how do we approach even the BAP types who might want to ban seed oils as their political formula, and we maybe just clear them out. How might we consolidate everyone behind that banner?
You see, I'm still not convinced that it all has to be like one formal organization. What's more important is that everybody's just generally aligned on that message. So like Bronze Age Pervert, he's already been there like 3-4 years. He already wants to clear them out and has been saying so for ages. You know, all of the kook sphere and the anti, you know, the people who've been on like the COVID train, you know, most of them believe the world is run by a satanic cabal. Of course they want to clear them out. So in a way, the reason I'm picking the formula is because it's the one that I think everybody already agrees on it. So it's the challenge is to find a way to get all those people to see that the solution to this problem is not going to be through conventional politics. You know, I think a lot of the more boomery types, and even America First are a bit like this. If I understand Fuentes correctly, he just wants to be like part of the GOP. This, like he just wants like a place. Like he wants. Am I correct on that? I don't really watch Fuentes, or has he turned back on that position now? I can see people shaking their heads.
That's iffy.
That's iffy now. Okay.
Yeah, it's. I would say yes and no, but I heard some no's, and a lot of sort of.
The best thing is that if everybody just stops seeing the outer party, as Mulberg would call it, as the potential solution, you're not going to vote your way out of this. You have to see them as the same You have to see them as a uni party, like that we already live in the totalitarian one-party state. This illusion of choice that we have is a nonsense. So that is the great challenge, I think, is trying to get everybody on that. That said, there is a conversation to be had about whether whether somebody like an Eric Zemmour, right, who's got big momentum in France, like if he won, for example, would that be the kind of like quote unquote revolution that would happen in France? If he enacts his platform, that would be as good as a revolution in the French system, because he's basically saying he's going to tear out the apparatus, the woke apparatus there. That's a properly radical program, as far as I can see. So, you know, as much as I've got reservations about him and so on, I mean, I saw a quote from Viktor Orban earlier on today, where Orban was saying like liberal democracy is Orban was talking almost like a kind of neo-reactionary. He was talking about Cthulhu swimming left and liberal democracy being a ratchet system that just leads to more and more progressivism and kind of, you know, nonsense. I mean, if Orban is really serious about that, Hungary has already had its revolution, if that makes any sense. So as many of us are kind of we're against democracy in principle, politics is messy, and you could, like, who knows, like there could be a different route there. You know, maybe maybe the elites will be asleep at the wheel and allow people like Zemmour or Orban to get in. In which case, you know, we have to see it, like, in which case you can just hitch to those wagons. One of the things I think people forget is that it's not just us, it's not just you people sitting in that room and people who watch my show and so on. There are already existing like attempts to organize, and I think the best thing that a lot of us could do is just to try to embed in those and steer people away from things that are like obviously wrong-headed, like obviously going in the wrong direction, i.e., you know, if they're sliding back to boomer truth type stuff. That's the best thing that all of us could do. If you get involved with stuff, just steer it more towards our side of things, because it'll be slow. Like this whole process will be slow, and I think that any attempt to like consolidate everything into one big thing is just going to draw the eye of Sauron, and they'll put a stop to it very quickly. Our disparate nature is a strength, due to their capacity to shut down centralized organization. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hello, AA.
Hello.
As more of an aspiring aristocrat of the soul, I've been well accepting that this is going to be a decades-long project. And so the idea of a uni formula is very intriguing. However, I can't help but think of the immediate downsides of such a coalition with little in common besides hatred for its enemy. As it is only hatred that binds it together, as the goal becomes closer and closer to completion, each part of the coalition would become more and more incentivized to court allies that it would typically not consider, or engage in other underhanded actions to prepare to seize the throne. What I'm getting at here is a coalition with only clearing them out has very limited future until unless there's a unifying positive vision. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that, and just anything you'd have to say.
When you say like capture the throne, what do you mean? Because what I'm envisaging is that when they're cleared out, there will be a great it'll be like, so if you can imagine the world global system as this being this giant structure made of glass. When we clear them out, it shatters into million pieces, like into thousands of little pieces. So it won't be a case of just like, because if they're cleared out, that means their structures are gone, and there'll be a reversion back to smaller political units. So yes, this process that you're talking about will go on, but I'm not envisaging that you end up running the world. It's not like just like replacing the current globalist and now you're the new globalist type thing. There would be a lot more localized government, like old-fashioned localized government. And again, each place would end up with the government that most reflects its people. You know.
Yes, that makes sense. Allow me to clarify. Let's use the United States as an example. So let's say, year 3 of the clearing them out process struggle. Faction A, let's say it's the America First faction, begins to get courted by, a certain Israeli First faction or something along those lines. They're even more motivated to begin clearing out their opposing factions in order to maintain business as usual. Kind of like, post early USSR began immediately aligning itself with Western capitalistic interests. That is the that's the thrust of my statement.
Yeah, yeah. All of that will be tricky to navigate when the time comes. But I think we're so far away from it that even thinking about that is probably going to be like counterproductive. My thought is that if the line is clear them out, that is an absolute kind of exclusion of establishment types already. That makes any sense. Why would they even want to be part of it? Because it's not like their loyalty is to the current power structure. Like, who, like, surely their if their loyalty is to the regime, why would they try to be part of the thing that's trying to bring them down? Like in your calculation.
Just another attempt to seize more power, in like the 30 Years' War, you have countries swapping sides several times in order to gain an advantage. Now, granted, the interests of nobility is far different than the interests of, let's say a mega corporation, an international mega corporation, or a deeply embedded nation's interest. But that's the thing about coalitions. As long as you have an enemy to hate or someone else to tear down, you can find strange bedfellows.
Yeah, but I mean, the reason I'm insisting on the kind of negative vision is that you're right that hatred is has some dangers with it, ones that you're pointing out. But historically, it's been an incredibly powerful motivator. I even look at like in this country, for example, there are football teams. There are Arsenal supporters and Spurs supporters. Okay, Tottenham Hotspur. They hate each other. They're both like London clubs. Okay, but most Tottenham fans that I know are happier when Arsenal lose than when Tottenham Hotspur win. Like they're just motivated purely out of like spite for the other team. It's a very powerful motivator. It's just like human nature. I think it's just like some part of human nature that our enemies activate extremely well. So that's why that's one reason. That's a kind of psychological reason. The other reason, though, is that I think, just in my experience, the positive vision will immediately just lead to a kind of sectarian problem where you're just always going to have these smaller and smaller splinter groups like Greg Johnson was talking about. So, he was trying to find the big tent. His big tent is, the white nationalist thing. But for various reasons, I'm skeptical. I talked in the talk why I'm not convinced that political formula will necessarily work, especially in America. Whereas this one might, because you don't have to sell a whole program of people to just be like, well, we just want to get rid of these guys. It's just very simple, so, but yeah, as it gets closer, you're right. It'll be fraught with danger, but that's power and politics, in all eras,
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you, AA.
Last one. Oh, good morning, AA. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Oh, good to hear. Good to hear. My main concern is obviously we will not be at the end of this top dog in the world. It seems to us that we will not have the same sort of hegemony that we once had back in the mid-century. It just seems like that time that just was never handed down to us. So we have to sort of dispel with the idea of basically maintaining the global America as an empire, but based. So I feel like that's a hang up for a lot of people. And it sort of comes out in their concerns. But that's really more of a comment than anything. My question is do you see any problems personally or any sort of reservations that you have with the clear them out strategy? Because it sounds pretty good, but
no, I mean, the only thing I'll say is that when it is when it is achieved, it will lead to there will be a period of turmoil, and it's not like this is going to be enacted and everybody just gets to chill out eating Doritos. Okay, at some point there'll be turmoil, and political change on that sort of level is always messy, and there'll be unfortunately bloodshed and all sorts of things. So the only thing I'll say is if you're committed to that, you have to be prepared to see all sorts of things that the stuff of history is made of. And I think that realistically, and I've talked to Keith and Joel and other people about this as well. Realistically, most people on our side who are conservatives do not have the character for that sort of thing. Conservatives are people who kind of value family life, and they kind of want things to be safe, and they don't want things to change, and they don't really want to put their neck out. That's why they're conservatives. Whereas clear them out requires a different type of person from people who tend to make up conservative movements.
It requires a zealous justice. It's not really it's a zealous justice.
Yeah, kind of zealous justice and a kind of radicalism, kind of extreme. I mean, I remember when I first when I went to the Mises Institute and Joe Salerno gave this speech and said Murray Rothbard had 3 mantras, and the first one was extremism. Basically, you don't back down from this one principle. You're prepared to go to a place where nobody else will go to. But of course, most conservatives are much closer to the Tory boy that I fight with. They just kind of want things to be as they are and to be left alone and just carry on kind of living doing their barbecue cookouts with their family and all this sort of stuff. But that kind of conservatism just it loses politically, and eventually you need a different set of people to just set the apple cart back a little bit, as has happened all through history. And it won't be forever. Whatever replaces, whatever comes after Clear Them Out, also that will pass as well.